In this chapter, we'll speak about forms. And forms can be useful to either display information to a user or collect user information. So let's create a first form. First of all, I'm going to run an API endpoint, a query that will return all my users in my CyberArk identity tenant. And to do so, I go to the connector for CyberArk identity platform under the C directory, and I'm going to use the get users endpoint call. I need to set my authorization. I need to make sure that the hostname is correct. In my case, that's Flows tutorial. And we don't require any mapping because this doesn't require any parameters. And I'm going to run this already to see if we get something back. So let's take a look at the results. Get users, response, body, and here we can see now that we have some results and there's an array of 15 elements. And in those elements, I can find under the row users with usernames and user identity, ID, etc. I'm going to copy the body here because I will need that for my form to populate my form. I'm going to add here a form. So click on the create forms, drag and drop in the element, give it a name. And also make sure that we set the header because that is required. So under the map section, we set something to the header, and then I'm going to edit the form. I'm going to choose here a select element, which will be a drop down. And I'm going to set this label to something meaningful, select users from list, and save this. And by doing so, I have now received in my mapping section new elements that I can fill in. I have here under the mapping section now, select user from list, label, and value. And for the label, I'm going to fill in the usernames, and I'm going to get those usernames from my previous call. But first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove that example from the body and copy and paste in the body that I've just copied from the results, just to make sure that whatever is returned is correct and that we understand how these mapping work and that we can select now the correct values from the results. So I'm going to choose here the display name and there the value. The value will be what we return upon selection of the username, so upon the selection of the label. You can see here the index, that means it's an array, so that's what we need. I'm going to run this. And then the form will pop up, and if all goes right, in a drop-down list, I will have now all my users. And selecting one of these users and then clicking on submit will return me the user ID value related to my form. Let's take a result. Let's take a look at the results. Display form, and now we can see here the UID returned. So, okay, let's take a deeper look at forms. Let me create a new flow, drag and drop the form element, give it a name, and then edit the form. Like you've seen before, you have here basic elements, like the text field and the text array field, passwords, select buttons. These are all the basic elements that you can just drag and drop into your form. There's also an advanced section. And underneath the advanced section, you'll find some more elements like email, like a date and time picker, location picker, and so on. These have a bit more advanced things like the email field, for example, will try to figure out if it's a valid email address format-wise. Let me drag and drop here a text field. I'm just going to give it a name, some text in here, and as you can see, there are multiple options. I'm going to disable this. So this could be a field where you would expose information to a user, but where he cannot interact with that field. I'm going to add another one, another text field where people can enter their name. And I'm going to make sure that they have to fill it in. So I'm going to make it mandatory. Under the validation, you will find this required button that you can click. And now let's save it. I'm also going to add a email field to it. Same thing, enter your email address. And I'm also going to make that mandatory to fill in. Save it. Validation first, of course. Save it. I'm going to add a checkbox for people to accept a policy. Save it as well. And I'm also going to add an extra button where people can cancel rather than submit the form. So I'm going to change the label to cancel. Okay. So now we have a few more elements on the form. By the way, if you'd like to change any of the elements that you managed already, or which you put already on there, you can simply click on it and click on the edit button. You can move it. You can even edit the JSON, but that's a bit more advanced. So if you click on the edit button, you go back to the place where you can change the fields, for example, or set some more options. Now you will find that this form builder has a lot of options. It's not the goal in this training to go over them, but you have, for example, the data tab, where we can do a lot of stuff. You can do validation like maximum length and minimum length and word length and other things. You can work with APIs. In fact, this whole form builder is built upon Form.io. And here you see the property name, for example, as the one that will be exposed in the fields that you will find in the logic for the flow. You can even change the layout if you'd like. You can work with CSS or HTML elements. So you can give it any look and feel you like. But like I said, that's a bit more advanced stuff that you can do with flows. In fact, if you go to the help button and you click on there, then it will take you to Form.io. That would be a total different training, to be honest, where you can find a lot of things that you can do, like including some logic elements, data validation, how the form will look like, layout, and so on. Okay, here we see a little preview. Let's close this and let's run it. Let's give it a different name. Forms test. And save it. And now run it. So here you see now the form test, the first field, some text in there is empty because we didn't give it any value, but you can see it's not possible to change it. The name field is mandatory, the email field as well, and you need to provide it with a proper formatted email. Let's click the accept button and submit. So you have seen that this field, the text field, the first field was a field that could not be changed. Let's give it some value. Let's enter something in here. So this will be a fixed field text. And let's save this again and run it again. And now you can see the text is appearing there, but you can't change it. Enter your name, something, make sure that you have a properly formed email address, accept the terms and conditions, and submit or cancel. I'm going to submit it for the time being, and then let's take a look at the result. So click on the form field and look at the response, and then you will find what we have entered for the name, for the email address, that it's been accepted, and all the other fields like the cancel, etc., they are empty because we have not changed them in any way. Let's run this form again. Run it is for form. Let's fill in the fields, the mandatory fields. But I'm going to click on the cancel button now rather than the submit button. And let's now take a look at the result. And now you will find in the result, if you click on the form and you look at the objects, that the cancel was set to true. So this is something that you could use then, for example, in the next node, you have to take a decision on which path to take. But that's for a next training where we will speak about decisions. In the next examples, we will create some calculated fields in a form. I'm going to create here a new flow with a form. I set the mapping to something. Edit the form. I'm going to add here a text field, which will be the first name. And I'm going to add a last name as well. And I'm going to create a text field that will contain the calculated email address. Okay, this field, the first name, if you take a look at it, then you'll find here API, and that's the name that we give to the property automatically. It usually will be the first word and then capital last word, but you can change that to anything you like. But for now, we're going to use whatever is produced here. And you also will find, of course, the labels and the elements to be available in the mapping section of the form. Now for the calculated field, I'm going to go to data, calculated value. And this works basically on some Java scripting that you can use, and you can refer to the values of the elements. The value of this element itself, I'm going to set to data.firstname plus a dot plus the data.lastname plus an @ sign with the domain at domain.com, for example, and close this with if I run this now, then you will see the calculated fields is still empty, but as soon as I start typing the first name and the last name, then the field will be calculated automatically. And submitting this, of course, would return the value for that element. Here's another example I'm going to use. I'm going to call it passwords. What I like to do is I'm going to compare two passwords to see if they are equal. The label for this one will be enter password, and the API name will then be enter password with a capital P. Again, that's something you can choose, but that's what we make of it by default. Here I'm going to say re-enter password, or repeat password. Save this. I'm going to add an HTML element here that will contain a text saying the passwords do not match. I'm going to make this a hidden field so it doesn't appear until there is certain conditions here. In the advanced condition sections, I'm going to add some Java scripting. I'm going to say if the data of the enter password is not equal to the data of the repeat password, brackets, else format is a little bit. Here I'm going to say show equals to true, and if they are the same, then I'm going to say show equal to false. So this will result into showing that field or not, based upon, of course, the values in the first two elements Let's run this. Okay, enter the password. As soon as I start entering the password, then of course they do not match. But when they match, then the field will disappear. Here I'm going to work with drop-down selections and button selections. Let me start with a drop-down first. I'm going to call it select button. I'm going to create a form, which I give a map a header, my selection, for example, and edit the form. I'm going to add here a select field, which is a drop-down, basically. Save this and close it. Now I'm going to feed the elements in the label and the value section. And to do so, I will create here an array. And I'm going to call it the first element, element 1, element 2, element 3. And I'm also going to give it certain values. So that means if I would select element 1, for example, then it would or will return first. In case I choose the second one, it will be second. And in case of the third one or third element, it will be third. Okay, let's run this flow. So the form will appear and you will have a drop-down button where you can select from the elements 1, 2, 3. If you submit it, of course, then it would return that specific value, the first, the second, or the third. So in our case, that will be the second element. Second. And that you can then use in the next nodes, of course. Now, let me remove this one. And now let's use not a drop-down button or element, but an element with select boxes. I'm going to call it select and edit the form. Now here I'm going to add the select boxes and save this. If I try to save it, I will get an error that it requires a value. So you need to fill in something. And to do so, I'm just going to fill in something. It could be dummy or whatever name you give it, because we will replace this element with the array that we will feed in the mapping section anyway. So in the mapping section, same thing here. I'm going to create an array with element 1, 2, 3. First element, no, actually, let me call that element 1. And element 2. And for the values, I'm going to do the same thing. First and second and third. Okay, run this. And now we get a form where we can select some boxes. So I'm going to select here element 1 and 3, submit this. Let's take a look at the results. So we have now received from the form an array that contains 3 objects, and in each object you will find the label, the element, and the checked being true or not. Now, since this is an array, of course, you can loop through the elements. So you could add a loop after this selection node. Actually, let me do this. I'm going to create a loop here. And that loop will loop through the elements from the form. I'm going to select here the select boxes checked. I'm also going to add a Slack post node here so that I can post my results to Slack. So Slack, Web API, chat, post, message. If I choose here my authorization for Slack, I'm going to post in the general channel, and I'm going to post, let's see, a text. You know what, I'm going to change this a little bit. I currently only have the value, the count. I don't have an example yet. So I'm going to quickly change this not to the selected field, but to the select boxes, so that I have all elements, so including the labels and the values, etc. Now to fill this in, we don't have a model yet. So that means if I type here, let's say field, then I don't have anything in the data yet, in the example yet. So let's go back to our previous result and copy that JSON in the array. So I'm going to copy here the array. And so in the array, you found the elements. What I need to do here is I need to obviously just pass in one element, not the array, because we understand already that there is an array. And now you can see that the examples will be exposed. So I'm going to add here field. I'm going to use a checked button as well to see if that field was true or false. Select element 1, 3, submit. And now in Slack, of course, we find the element 1 to be true, second to be false, and the third to be true, exactly what I had chosen. Now, be careful to make sure that you have the same fields present in the label and the value, otherwise you will have some strange behavior. So let me change this here to the fourth element, run this. As you can see, still 3 elements are shown. The fourth element will not be available. The other way around, if I would have one label too many and no value to return, then the JSON returned will look different as well. So let's try this here. So I've got 4 elements, but only 3 values. Run this, you'll find the 4 elements appearing. So let me select 4 and 3, submit this, and now go to the results. And you will find previously there was an array returned with all the elements. If you look at result now, then you will find select boxes first, second, third, false, true. So the labels, etc. are missing because there's a mismatch in between the number of fields that you have for labels compared to the values. Here I'm going to show you how you can do some more fancy things with JavaScript in forms. I'm going to create here a form that I call properties and edit the form. I'm going to add a drop-down box first, which I will call, just keep it on animal. I'm going to change it to animal. I'm going to enter some data here in the data source. So the first one will be a dog. And as a value, I'm going to use a JSON object that contains a few elements. For example, what type of animal is this? The dog is a mammal. And it has how many legs maybe? It has 4. And it has a fur. I'm going to set that to true. I'm going to add another element, which I call fish. And I need to use the same JSON format here. So copy and paste that one into the second element. And this is going to be of type fish. I could have used a name for that fish in the label, of course. It has no legs and it has no fur. So I'm going to set that to false. So this element has the name animal. Save this. I'm going to add a text field here. And I'm going to select data from a text field. This text field I'm going to call the type. Remember, dog or fish. And the data here will be obviously coming from that JSON that we've just added. And therefore, we need to do a few things. I'm going to use some JavaScript here. First of all, I'm going to feed all the animal JSON into the JSON variable I'm creating. And I'm going to parse that JSON into an object so that we can manipulate it a little bit easier. And as the value for this field, I'm going to use the object type. So eventually that will be the mammal or the fish. I'm going to save this. Actually, let me also make this a hidden field so that no one, well, a disable field so that no one can change this field, that it will only be information, let's say. The next field I'm going to call fur. And here I'm going to manipulate the data a little bit more fancy. Same principle, of course. Make it disabled. Data, calculate value. Here I will be using that JavaScript as well, but I'm going to make it a little bit different. The object fur would be true or false, and I would like to make it a bit more fancy. So therefore, I'm going to say if object fur is true, then I'm going to set my value to yes. And else, I'm going to set my value to no. Value equals no. And I have to remove that last one, of course. Okay, save. Let's give it a try. Run. And if I now select here in the drop-down dog, then the type will be filled in as mammal and the fur will be yes. If I choose this to fish, then the type will be fish and the fur will be no. Submit this, and let's take a look at the results returned. And here we can find now animal selected was fish, no fur.